Hi, Kevin here from the Mathsaurus, and recently I put out a video about the GCSE exams being cancelled in the UK and A-level exams that the government announced earlier in the week, and I immediately got a lot of questions about whether IGCSEs would be cancelled and other qualifications as well. It makes sense, I make a lot of IGCSE content here, and whether in particular people in international schools overseas would still be able to sit exams, whether perhaps people in the private sector here could still sit IGCSEs. And there's been, for me, quite a surprising news story today, which is saying that exam boards are still going to be offering the IGCSE exams, and that private schools in the UK seem like they're planning to still offer those to their students. Now, I think this is going to be quite a confusing announcement to a lot of people, and so in this video I just want to talk a little bit about the differences between the GCSE and the IGCSE qualifications, why we'd be in this situation where the private sector is allowed to do something totally different to the state sector potentially, what the impacts might be on the fairness in the system, and whether the government actually has power to do something about it, or whether it's something we should really worry about, and we will talk about that in the rest of the video. So the last video I put out about this went a bit beyond my usual audience, so if you're seeing this channel for the first time, my name's Kevin, I'm an Oxford Maths graduate. I created the YouTube channel Mathsaurus about 5 or 6 years ago now, whilst I was teaching in 2 of the country's top independent schools in London. I'm now working towards a PhD in mathematical finance whilst continuing to tutor and teach on YouTube. So do head over to the Mathsaurus website or send students over there if you think they might be interested. There are hundreds of videos covering GCSE, IGCSE and A-level maths, as well as the entrance exams, the STEP, MAT and TAMUA for Oxford, Cambridge and other universities. So I hope that's useful to you or some people you know. Please do like the video and subscribe to the channel if you can. It really helps me get this content out there. Right, back to what we're talking about today. So to understand what's going on here, we've really got to think about what the difference between GCSE exams is and IGCSE exams, why those 2 sets of exams exist and who the different audiences are. It might be a bit confusing because on the face of it, and I'll talk mainly about maths here, GCSE and IGCSE maths are very similar in their content. Now, before the introduction of the 9-to-1 grades a few years ago, there was arguably a bigger difference between GCSE and IGCSE, and IGCSE was seen as a slightly tougher qualification. But these days, they are really very similar qualifications, I think, vary a little bit in topic from exam board to exam board, but overall the same sort of stuff. You've got to know it very well to really know the difference, I think. And but to get your head around the importance of the international GCSE, you do really have to think in an international context. And now I know on this channel I get viewers taking the IGCSE exams around the world, perhaps in British international schools, perhaps just in other schools that are choosing to follow some of the British style curriculum. And it is a moment to remember that actually, you know, although the UK has GCSE qualifications that we offer for British students, here these exams are sat much more widely for all sorts of reasons, whether it's because people want to go on to do A-levels or to come and study in the UK, or just because they are a very reputable and well-established qualification that's sat in various parts of the world. So one aspect of this is that just because the UK government has cancelled exams in UK schools because of a situation with the coronavirus here, that doesn't mean that other countries will also want to cancel their exams. And if our exam boards are offering international qualifications, the government isn't really able to stop the exam boards from continuing to offer those qualifications. It wouldn't make sense. And so given that those qualifications exist, it then becomes possible for any private candidate to sign up to those exams. But the reality of this pandemic is that, you know, the COVID-19 is going to be flaring up at different times in different places. Who knows where we'll be in the UK by the summer, and the situation in different parts of the world is going to be different too. So before we come on to any conclusions, the other thing we really need to put in context is the state of the UK education system, and this distinction between a state sector, which is run effectively by the government and bound a lot by government decisions, as opposed to independent schools, private schools. And while state schools are only allowed to enter students for qualifications that are regulated by Ofqual, independent schools are allowed to enter students for whatever qualifications they want, basically. And so that means it's much easier, of course, for the government to impose rules on state schools, and when it makes that announcement it can say no state schools are going to do GCSEs, but it can't necessarily say that no independent schools are going to offer exams. Of course, in the lockdown, it can say that those schools can't open, but we're looking probably at a situation in the summer where actually schools will be open at this point, where the exams are going to be cancelled. So it creates this very interesting and slightly confusing situation. But the basic situation here is it is very difficult for the government to actually prevent private schools from entering students into qualifications and sitting the exams if the schools are open, if the exam boards have those qualifications. So, of course, the situation will be very different if, come May or June, schools are still closed. But the current, government messaging is that schools are going to be open again from February, perhaps, maybe a bit later. But, certainly no one's envisaging a situation where schools are still closed at Easter. Yes, we have very high numbers at the moment, but the vaccine's rolling out. It looks like, hopefully by the summer we'll be going in a positive direction. Now, nobody knows. But the interesting thing about this policy decision is that, unlike last year, when exams were cancelled, during a point where there was a huge flare-up and the expectation was that it might be impossible or too dangerous to have students going into school, this year that situation is quite different. So there's no suggestion that it's going to be too dangerous at the moment to run the exams. The reasons behind the cancellation have been questions to do with fairness, that because people have missed school, it would be unfair to have them sit the exams and get qualifications on that basis. And we'll think about that question of fairness again in a second, actually. So what are the options? Could the government ban independent schools from running exams? Well, it's not totally impossible, especially for independent schools in the UK at least. They could pass a new law that somehow says that independent schools are not allowed to sit those exams, or strongly encourage them or incentivize them in some way. But it would be very difficult. There's not really a legislative structure there. There's not a sort of mechanism by which the government can easily tell independent schools to do that unless they go through the process of passing law, being debated in Parliament, all that sort of stuff. So, and that would be very controversial, and I'm not sure it would get passed. There's a lot of resistance to interference in the independent sector when you look in the House of Commons. But maybe it would get through, maybe that would be possible. Certainly it's clear that the UK government only has jurisdiction over the UK. I mean, actually, as well as having studied maths, I also did a law degree, and one of the things that you learn in the first year of a law degree is that there's this example that the government, if they want to, can intervene and pass a law that sort of bans smoking in the streets of Paris, right? And there's nothing that prevents the government from passing any law that they want to that says X, Y, and Z can't happen. But the law also comes with important practical considerations, and the point here is that, well, you have no jurisdiction over Paris. Who's going to enforce that law? You don't run the French police, so they can't actually stop that. And certainly, when you look at British international schools, the government's not going to stop British international schools from based around the world running exams if they want to. And and also it's going to be very hard for them to stop exam boards coming up with exams and offering them to the schools if they want to. They could say that in the UK, you can't offer, the exam boards can't offer the exams to anyone sitting them in the UK, but it's just very complicated, very messy. I'm not really sure that's something they're going to want to do. Another option, of course, the government have is just to do nothing, leave it as it is. They can say, fine, well, we'll just have two different systems. We have a state sector and an independent sector, and people can do what they want, and they will just try their best to set up the system for state school students so that it is as advantageous as possible, perhaps even incentivize independent schools to take the same option that state schools are having by, for example, promising that exam grades are going to be very high this year, and so perhaps they'll make it easier to pass GCSEs on teacher assessment. It looks like there's going to be a bit more giving the benefit of the doubt. But again, very hard to say for sure. They could also take another U-turn, and they could make a bold decision to perhaps give students in state schools the choice. At the moment, state schools are not allowed to offer the IGCSEs, but they might say that in exceptional circumstances, if students really want to sit an exam, they would allow those students who want to prove their ability, who are confident they can get the top grades, the opportunity to sit the exam, but have a backup plan that is teacher assessment for those that have missed a lot of school who don't feel they're in that position, or something like that. So there are a variety of options here, and none of them are perfect. We're in the middle of this pandemic that is causing all sorts of problems, so we wouldn't expect a perfect solution here, but there are a lot of options. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. I think there's no, I can't tell you the answer to this, but there's a few thoughts. As I've been thinking about this, it really does raise this question about why the exams have been cancelled in the first place. It's very strange in a way that we've cancelled exams when we expect schools to be open and we expect it to be possible and safe potentially for those exams to be sat. Of course, if we were in the middle of a fire-up of pandemic, then I think it's right to shut schools and not to bring students together. But imagine we were in the same place as in the summer last year, the numbers are down and we're out of lockdown for a while, people have been vaccinated. Why wouldn't we let students sit exams? And the argument that's been raised is fairness. It wouldn't be fair to students to make them sit exams. I'm not quite sold on this argument myself personally. In some ways I think it's quite unfair to not let students sit exams if they want to. And again, if you see private schools that are going to be saying we're going to put our students in for the exam because we think it gives them a competitive advantage, you've got to see that as some sort of an alarm bell, that actually perhaps what the government is saying is fair here is not as fair as it sounds. Of course, I've got huge sympathy for students that have missed school and are behind and would not do as well in the real exams as perhaps they might have done. And I think it will impact students from the state sector more than the private sector, where people have access to tutors and extra support, and the whole sector is just more resourced and more resilient. And it's a fact that we can't escape that those who are well resourced are going to be able to ride through all sorts of problems more easily. And there is unfairness in the system and the society that we have around us in that. But does that mean that we should cancel the exams? That's the question I'm focused on here. So I think we can also think about exams in two different ways, right? I mean, there is a sense in which we want to use exams as a way of selecting people to do A-levels, to go to universities, for jobs, for other things like this. There's a question about how exams lead to allocations of resources in some sense then, and opportunities. And so there are questions of fairness tied up with the exams. But there are also some basic sort of facts of the exams, more straightforwardly, that actually, getting a grade in an exam certifies that you are competent in something. And so I'm very wary of lowering those standards. Now, some people might say, well, in something like maths or English, perhaps it's harmless. But if you think about, would you lower the exam for a more technical qualification? Would you be happy to say, oh, well, he missed, 10 weeks of his mechanics qualification, so, okay, we know he can't fix these parts of a car, but we'll give him the qualification anyway. Or, oh, we know she missed that term, so she can't deal with these sorts of medical emergencies, but we'll make her a doctor anyway, So there is, for GCSE maths and English, we say, oh, maybe, okay, perhaps it doesn't matter as much. Perhaps it doesn't, because people go on typically to do other qualifications afterwards if they are going to use maths and English in their jobs, and if they're not going to use them so directly in their jobs, they tend, maybe they drop out at that point, and all that matters is they've got a certain grade that they need in order to get into jobs. But it's an interesting point, because I do think that when we artificially inflate the grades in exams, we do lower the value of those qualifications. And so in the future, if you had two candidates in front of you, from this year, one of them had sat the exam and got a grade 8, say, and the other one had got the grade 8 as a result of a teacher assessment or some other process, I do think there's probably somewhere more value in the one that sat the exam. So I think that's why private schools would still try to enter their candidates, not just because they're confident that they're going to do well, but because they think that somehow that real exam is going to be more reputable or more worthwhile. And I do think and you can make arguments against having exams in general, replacing them with more coursework, more assessments, more teacher grades in general. And, I've got a lot of time for some of those arguments, but they're all a little bit aside from what we're talking about right now, I think. Yes, in the future, maybe there's a chance to learn some lessons from the pandemic, to take this as an opportunity to think about how assessment works in general, to reflect on the differences between the private and the state sector perhaps as well. But right now, I'm not sure that's where this focus is. I do see a lot of people, trying to wedge arguments about, educational reform into the question of dealing with the pandemic, and sure, times of disaster are times that perhaps give more opportunity for change because things are already disrupted. So I can see why people might try to use that opportunity right now. But I do think we should separate those questions of dealing with the pandemic and then learning lessons from the pandemic. And they are not totally separable. But there we go. So one interesting fact last year even was that Cambridge did not cancel their STEP exams, right? The STEP exams are exams for maths for entrance to Cambridge University. I think they really realised this point that they really care about the integrity of that process. They care about getting the right students. They care about making sure the students on their courses are capable of doing them and not going to drop out. They're going to be able to support them through what is a really tough course. And it was a small exam. They ran it online. I think there were various problems with it. Of course, it was not going to be perfect in the pandemic, but they stuck with it. And it's kind of interesting that that would happen, right? And why do we hold on to an exam like that where we are happy to throw away, you know, foundation tier GCSE maths or something? I mean, I think undermines that qualification. I think it is important that, you know, if we're going to say that it's important to get a job that you've got to get a 4 or 5 or whatever it is in GCSE maths, that we stick with that and we don't just say, oh well, you know what, it doesn't really matter, you know, because that just undermines the whole system, right? If we say, oh, this year people who go into jobs don't really need that qualification, it's okay if they're a bit less numerate. Actually, no, we should respond by fixing the problem, by giving people extra support. Perhaps they do need extra lessons over the summer. Perhaps they need to, you know, to just take a month off now and do a month extra later in the year or something. I don't know what the answer is, but the answer is not just to throw away the aims of the education, right? Yes, there are unfairnesses that come about as a result of this process, but we should fix them in a way that doesn't undermine the very thing that it's all based on. And in maths, that is, you know, a certain level of academic achievement. You know, mathematics at every level leads into the next. If people haven't done all the stuff they need at GCSE, they're not going to be well prepared for A level, right? And that's just a fact. I mean, at some point we need to fix that gap, not just think we can fix it by, you know, changing the number on some grade somewhere. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so lots to think about here, and as I say, I'm pretty sure more is going to change here. I just saw this afternoon, and as I put that video out a couple of days ago, and it seems things have changed, I wanted to give you an update and to let you know a few of my thoughts. Really interested to hear what you think about any of these things below, whether it's about whether GCSEs and IGCSEs should happen this year or not, whether it's about the fairness of exams versus coursework or teacher assessments in general, about some of the unfairnesses between state schools and private schools, and what you think's going on there. But I hope that was interesting. I hope this has helped you just make a little bit more sense of the chaos that we're in at the moment in education. And the main thing is, right now, if you're preparing for exams this summer, try not to worry about it in this moment. Give it a couple of weeks at least, and hopefully some of the dust will settle and we'll know exactly where we are with all of these exams. I would say if you're sitting exams that are due to take place in the next couple of weeks around the world and you haven't been told they're cancelled, those ones are pretty surely going on. I think even in the UK there are some technical and professional qualifications that are still allowed to go on for various reasons. A lot of people asked me that in the last video, and all I'm saying here is I don't know anything about the details of what's happening in every place in the world, but if you haven't heard that your exams are cancelled locally, then what I'm talking about here really applies to the summer exams, and I'm mostly focused on the UK and the things that I'm thinking about, but of course mindful of the impact it has on people taking British qualifications overseas. So please do like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're new here, check out the website and the Amazon store and all the other things that I'll put in the links below. But for now, stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.